Okay. Well, good morning. I am so glad that you ventured out today from whatever it was that life had for you this week, and you came together, and I'm praying that somehow God will use the day to meet a need in your life. We're also thankful for all those of you who are joining us online, those who normally might be in the room, but you're online because of it, so thank you for being here. In fact, how about everybody in the room say good morning to everybody online? 1, 2, 3. Very good. Would you pray with me for just a moment before we get into God's Word? Lord, I'm just glad because I believe, I'm thankful. I'm just thankful, God, because I just sense and believe again that you bring together for these moments those you desire so much to do something in their life, and they need it. We all need it. Sometimes we just don't see it. But this morning, would you grant that we will see it, Lord? And you'll use this day and this moment to speak into our lives. Speak into our lives that word that we so desperately need. And Father, I'm going to trust you for that and pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, I should not have been surprised when he said it, but I was a little taken aback. This last, how long ago, when I was traveling in Brazil, I decided I wanted to get some things for my grandkids to bring home to them. You know, anybody do that? I wanted to get something. So I said to my Brazilian kid, Alon, could we go someplace? And he said, well, it's going to be really crowded. They had a holiday, and everybody was at the mall. But we went to the mall, and I mean everybody was at the mall. It was literally, you're squeezing through people. It was worse than the junior high hallway. I'm telling you, it was bad. And I get into this toy store, and I think they were all in the toy store. But I'm literally just trying my best to squeeze down an aisle, and I found something, and now I got to fight the lines at the checkout. I mean, the lines. This is worse than Walmart at Christmas. It was horrible. And so I walk up there, but this is when Alon, my Brazilian kid, says, oh, no, come over here. And there was this one line that didn't have anybody in it, really. He says, you get to stand here because you're old. I said, what? And he pointed to a sign. Above that line was a sign that said this sign was reserved for the elderly and the infirmed. And I'm so glad he made clear which one I was of that. Now, you can imagine how you would have felt if you'd just been called old. And you know what I did? I went to the line is what I did. Okay, we're in episode 5 of our 6-part series that looks at the unique challenges trying to live as a Christian in times like these and in a culture like ours. And the question we've been trying to ask is when we find ourselves, whenever we find ourselves in a times like these, and they are these times, how do we manage in a culture like ours to stand firm in our faith without giving in to the temptations of this culture? How do we stand firm while at the same time influencing that culture and not just simply alienating them by, trying to get on? How do we do both? How do we stand firm and yet have influence? And so that's what we've been looking at. And to answer that question, we looked at a guy who was able to do that, a man whose story is told in Scripture in a book that bears his name. The man's name was Daniel. The book talks about a time in the history of Israel when the people themselves had rejected God as their king. Can you imagine a nation that rejects God as their king? And every time I say that, you look at me like you don't get the sarcasm in that. Can you imagine a nation? Oh, you're still missing it. Anyhow, but they had, and because they had, God removed his hand of protection on them. And all of a sudden, they're finding themselves facing things they never thought they'd have to face. Boy, there's a lot I could say with that one. And one of those things they had to face, though, is that another nation came in to their nation and attacked them and defeated them. And then they took so many of them as captives back to the other foreign land and forced them into service of that kingdom. And among those who were taken back as prisoners of war and forced into the service of that kingdom and that king were Daniel and his good friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, better known to us as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And the amazing thing was, though, that they take them back there, they begin to indoctrinate them so they can put them into government service and get them to follow the culture. And in this very foreign, very ungodly, very strange to everything they knew world, all of a sudden, though, you have Daniel, who's not only able to meet the challenge of standing firm in his faith without giving in to the temptations and the pressures of that ungodly culture, but he's also having incredible influence on that culture for God, rather than simply alienating the people. And that's what we want to do. That's our goal. That's our goal as people of God in this culture and in this time. And so we've looked at this book of how Daniel navigated those challenges because we see in it God's playbook for us. And that's what I've tried to say. This is God's playbook for us in times like these. And so if you remember, let's do a quick review. Chapter 1, we said Daniel faced what we called the identity challenge. The first thing they tried to do to Daniel's friends was change their names so they could change their identity. Remember that? And we learned that culture's greatest goal is to change your identity, to get you to believe something that's absolutely not true about you, and it's not true about your God and your relationship with Him. And so we asked, will I let culture change my identity, or will I somehow work at changing the identity of culture? Then we looked at chapter 2, which we said had the relevance challenge, and at that point, Daniel, who started off, we said, around 15 years of age, and which one of you guys is close to 15? Let me see a hand, okay. Then the second one we said is closer to 20 years of age, and that's kind of like you, Seth. You're closer to 20 now, which is amazing. We're just so glad you made it. Oh, please tell me that didn't come out of my mouth, did it? So at 20 years of age, Daniel's facing the challenge that we call was the relevance challenge, which is culture's greatest ploy, and that's to marginalize your faith. It just wants to minimize God's wisdom and ways in your life so that it can push you and your faith to the sidelines. And we said that Daniel teaches us that we can overcome the inevitable chaos that happens in a culture like that if we will know that we know, have confidence that God is in control. He has actually made us for this moment, and so we speak God's wisdom into the confusion of our culture. Then we got to chapter 3 and what we called the worship challenge. And at that point in time, we said Daniel's around 30. So wave at us, Dalton. He's in his 30s. Anyhow, and we said at that age, the strategy of culture at this time was to co-opt their worship. Worship is that thing you do for the thing that value most in your life. What it is you look up, what it is you just spend, you want your time, your energy, what really, really value, that's worship. And you can worship lots of different things. You can worship your family, you can worship your car, you can worship your ball game, but you can also worship your God. And culture is trying to get you to co-opt your worship so it'll worship the things it wants you to worship rather than God. But we said if we'll stand firm and stand up for Jesus, Jesus will show up for us and we can have influence on others. Then we looked at chapter 4, which we said was the mindset challenge. And we said then that Daniel at that point is in his 50s. And who was it who admitted being in their 50s last week? Anybody in here? Well, anybody else in here admitting to be in their 50s? Okay, we got a couple of you. You know, if you're not going to, you don't admit it for them. Don't go pointing at them, okay? Yeah. So about 50 years of age, and at this point in time, culture's greatest project at that point was it's got to change the way you think. It's got to change the way you think, not just the way you think about yourself and about God, but the way you think about everything. It wants you to catch this. Culture this kind of culture wants you to make all of life all about you. And all about your pleasure, and all about now. It's got to convince you. It's all about you, it's all about your pleasure, and it's all about now. But that kind of mindset, we said, leads to insanity, and that's what chapter 4 was all. It just leads to insanity. The king lost his mind because of it. And we said, however, if we'll look up to God as our king, if we'll keep our focus on Him and follow His ways and His humilities, we can get our sanity back in a culture that has lost its mind. Well, that brings us to chapter 5. Okay, chapter 5. Now, the challenge I see Daniel facing in this chapter is what I would call, this one's a little tough. I'm going to call it the deception challenge. The deception challenge. And by that I mean this, that I think that in Daniel's day and also in our day, culture's greatest trick, watch this, is to conceal your consequences. Let me explain that. The enemy of your soul is going to use culture with all of its baubles and pleasures and thrills to get you to make choices that will lead you further and further away from God and His plan for your life. But in order to get you to do that, it's got to trick you into ignoring the consequences of those choices. Better yet, it's going to deceive you into believing There are no consequences to your choices, so go for it. It won't happen to you. It's not that big a deal. Have at it. That's what culture has to do in order to get you farther and farther away from God. It's just got to convince you there are no consequences. So that deception is what we're seeing when we get to the next chapter in Daniel's life and in the book of Daniel. If you found chapter 5 yet, here is how this chapter begins. Many years later. Oh, Daniel's no longer 50. Best we can understand, it's been 30 years since the previous chapter, so now we're talking about somebody in their 80s. Anybody willing to own that age and give us a view of it? Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to point it out for you, but my father over here, that's my parents right there. And what is wonderful is to see Daniel at all these different stages of life. Well, now he's at this age. He's at this age. And here's what we're told now. Many years later, King Belshazzar gave a great feast. Now, if you've been with us, you're going, wait a minute, that wasn't the name of the king in those other chapters. And it's because it is a different king after all these years. Daniel's been navigating these challenges through many decades and even different rulers of the kingdom. And I've created this little, hopefully you'll be able to tell what it means, to help you understand who this works. And so forgive my artwork because as I tell Mr. Loader every time I see him, it was the worst grade I got in school. So Nebuchadnezzar was the king when we started this book. But Nebuchadnezzar, he had the longest reign, the most powerful of all the Babylonian kings. But just like everybody else, he finally died. And you can't see it, but now he's got X's over his eyes and he's dead. Okay? His son, that they gave his son the name Evil Merodach. Isn't that a great name for a kid? So he becomes king. So now put him up. He's now king, okay? And he was promptly assassinated by his brother-in-law. So he gets killed. Boom, like that. A guy by the name of Nerilagasar. I'm going to call him Neri. Okay, so put him up there. So Neri assassinates his brother-in-law so he can take over the kingdom. And he manages to live all of 4 years as king until he dies. And so now he's dead with the X's over his eyes and you can't see him. He had a son by the name of Labasha Marduk, let's call it, and he became king. Okay, he becomes king, and he lasts for all of 2 months before he gets assassinated by a guy named Nabonidus. Okay, Nabonidus kills him. Boy, aren't you glad you don't live in that place? I mean, so Nabonidus assassinates him, and the thing about Nabonidus was he wasn't even a Babylonian. He was actually from one of these nations that Babylon had conquered, but he made a smart move by convincing one of the daughters of the original guy, Nebuchadnezzar, to marry him. So he gets married to a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, so they got that, puts him in a great place, and so when he assassinates the other kid, he gets to become king, okay? Now, what you're seeing here is the fact that Nabonidus was so disliked in Babylon that he decided he'd be better off living someplace else. So he went away from the kingdom, from the palace and the place of rulership, the capital, and he's living someplace else and leaves his son in charge of the kingdom. And that's his son now by the name of Belshazzar, the guy we came up across. Okay, have you followed me now? That's how far it went, and this is who we're looking at now, Belshazzar. Now, Belshazzar was a guy who thought to himself, if Dad leaves town and leaves you in charge of the kingdom, you know what the best thing to do is? Throw a party. And so that's what he did. He threw a party. And I mean, he partied hardy, okay? He threw a party at the palace for himself and 1,000 of his friends. So back to the text, chapter 5. Many years later, King Belshazzar gave a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles. And he drank wine with them. Evidently, the theme of his wild party was, it's my party and I'll drink if I want to. You know, I worked hard on these. You guys need to appreciate it more than that. But I want you to understand, he's just following culture's mindset. Remember, life's all about you. So make it all about pleasure. And make it all about now. Let the good times roll. Let's all just get ripped, okay? And that's what he did. And that brilliant idea led to an even worse idea. Keep reading. While Belshazzar was drinking the wine, he gave orders to bring out the gold and silver cups that his predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. He wanted to drink from them with his nobles, his wives, and his concubines. So they brought these golden cups from the temple of the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines, they drank from them. I want you to imagine somebody saying, hey, let's get the communion cups and use them as shot glasses. Yeah, oh my, that's what they're doing. And while they drank, they praised their own idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood. In other words, they're just totally making fun of God. They're mocking the real God as they party away, desecrating the things of God. Can you imagine a culture like that? Well, that was the scene at the palace. The party was going on strong until God showed up, and then the party was over. Here's what happens. Keep reading. Suddenly, they saw the fingers of a human hand writing on the plaster wall of the king's palace near the lampstand. Now, I don't know if it was like Thing in Adam's Family. Remember the hand? Okay, those of you who get that, I appreciate it. Those of you too young to understand that, you missed out. Anyhow, there's some kind of a hand. It's got this handwriting going on the wall. And the king himself, keep reading, the king himself saw the hand as it wrote, and his face turned pale with fright. His knees knocked together in fear, and his legs gave way beneath him. Literally, it says there in the last one, his loins let loose. And some think that means he lost his bodily functions. I'm working hard here today, and you guys are not appreciating it. Bottom line is, the boy freaked out. He just freaked out. So the king shouted for his enchanters, his astrologers, his fortune tellers to be brought to him before him, and he said to these wise men of Babylon, okay, he gets all the people who are supposedly the wisest ones, and brings them together and says, what's going on here? If you can read that and tell me what it means, I'll tell you what, I'll dress you in purple robes, which meant very expensive clothing, and you can have gold chains around your neck, like Mr. T, and you can become the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Third highest ruler, why only third? Because Belshazzar is number 2. Dad's number 1, he's another town. So you get it? See what's happening here? Well, one of these so-called wise men, none of them could figure out we don't know, king, we don't know. And let me tell you something, just kind of a side point. You'll never figure out life apart from God. Do you hear that? We all got questions, don't we? We've all got questions. But you're never going to figure out the answers apart from God. Go ahead and try. Go ahead. You'll learn. But you're not going to figure it out apart from God. Belshazzar sure didn't. So the king grew even more alarmed, it says, and his face turned pale. His nobles, too, were shaken. So we've got multiple people losing their bodily functions. What's going on here is that heaven is sending a warning, but they didn't get it. God was trying to warn them, but they didn't get it. They didn't understand the warning because they bought into culture's deception about consequences. They bought into that lie. It's no big deal. I mean, nothing's going to happen. Nothing bad's going to happen. Don't worry about it. This last week, I found myself having a serious talk with a couple of our students at the school who were reaping the consequences of some really bad choices. And they thought they wouldn't have any consequences when they were doing it. So I told them, one of the facts of life that I've learned over the years is this. And I gave them my little quote. Life is hard. It's harder when you're stupid. Don't do stupid. And folks, that was worth the whole price of admission today, right there. Life is hard. It's harder when you're stupid. Don't do stupid. They had done stupid, and they were reaping the consequences of it. So let me give you that fact of life in another way that sounds a little more refined for church, okay? Every choice has a consequence. Every choice has a consequence. Please hear me, young people. Every choice has a consequence. Every path has a destination. Not so, young people. Every decision has an outcome. Every choice has a consequence. Now, how many of you have now finally lived long enough and done stupid enough and faced the consequences of it that will say, yes, that's true? Okay. If you don't believe it yet, please just look around because we are bearing the consequences of our own doing stupid. here's what if I could get you to believe this, it would make such a difference in your life. You are free to choose. You are free to make your choices. However, you are not free to choose the consequences of your choices. Do you get that? You're free. Hey, you can do that. You want to do stupid, do stupid. Aren't you glad you live in a country where you're free to make that choice? Yeah. But guess what? You're not free to choose the consequences of those choices. Probably the most important truth I ever learned in my own life was a little quote in a diary by a young girl named Anne Frank. She was a young girl, like our young ones. Here's what she wrote. She was one of those Jews that were hiding from the Nazis and got caught. And while they were in hiding, she happened to put this in her diary which survived her because she got killed in a concentration camp. But her diary got published, and you may have heard of the Diary of Anne Frank. In it, one of the most important things I ever read, it said this: our lives are fashioned by choices. First, we make our choices, and then our choices make us. Do you see that? Keep going down. Our lives are fashioned by choices. One more. First, we make our choices. Then our choices make us. Every choice has a consequence. Every path has a destination. You choose it, you walk it, it's going to get there. Every decision has a repercussion. Now, go back to Daniel 5. We got a warning that's going off. We got a warning going off. The handwriting is on the wall. The problem was that Belshazzar and his wise men had no clue what it meant. Belshazzar's mother, however, she knew. Notice what happened. When the queen mother heard what was happening, she hurried to the banquet hall, and she said to Belshazzar, okay, king, hope you live. Don't be so pale. In other words, basically she says, son, get a grip on it, would you? Get a hold of yourself. Come on, you're embarrassing us. She says, listen, there is a man in your kingdom who has within him the spirit of the holy God. So now they're going to get Daniel. That's what you point to. But I love the way she says, come on, listen. There's this man that you know of who's got an answer for this. And I found myself as I was reading that thinking, I want to be that kind of guy in this culture. When things aren't working well for you, when things are going nuts in this community, when people are stressed, I want to be the one that'll go, let's talk to Russell. I think he'll have an answer. I want to be that kind of guy. I want to be that for you. I love you too much not. I want to be that. And she says, listen, there is a man in your kingdom. And he's got the Spirit of God in him. Go ask him. Go ask him. So Daniel was brought before the king. Okay? So Daniel was brought before the king, it says. And Belshazzar says, so you're that guy. You're that guy I heard about, right? I need your help. And so he offers Daniel the same offer he made to the other guys. If you're able to tell me what this means, I'll give you all this stuff, and I'll make you the third highest ruler in the kingdom. And to which Daniel says, keep your money. I don't roll that way. I'll explain this to you just like I explained it to your grandfather when he tried the same offer to me then. I can't interpret this stuff, but God can. And he shares it with me. When he does, I'm glad to share it with you. God is trying to get your attention, son. The handwriting is on the wall. And yes, folks, that's just where we get that phrase. The handwriting is on the wall. Now, in order to explain what that handwriting meant to him, he gives him a little bit of family history lesson. It's your own family. Remember your granddad, Nebuchadnezzar? Remember our little chart all the way back up, Nebuchadnezzar? Remember him? Well, you know what? Your grandfather tried to play the same games with God that you're trying to play. Trying to ignore, just trying to live life, all about you, all about pleasure, all about now. He tried to do the same thing, but God gave him a warning. He didn't listen, and he went nuts over it. He went insane. You remember that? You were around. I know you were here. You remember when your granddad went crazy? Yeah, I do. Well, listen to me, says Daniel. You're doing the same thing your grandfather did. You have set yourself up against the Lord your God. And I want you to stop and let that sink in. I want you to hear that, not just as a warning to Belshazzar, but a warning to our generation and to our culture. You have set yourself up against the Lord our God. You're insisting on a life that's all about you, and it's all about pleasure, and it's all about now, and by doing that, you're setting yourself up against God. And when everybody does that, there will be consequences. Whenever anyone sets themselves up against God, there will be consequences. The handwriting will be on the wall. And Daniel went on to explain to them what that handwriting meant. But for now, I just want you to catch it. The sirens are going off. Are we listening? I remember I forget where I was traveling, but they found out I was from this region. They went, oh, that's where they have all those tornadoes, right? Oh, yeah. Oh, I mean, people get killed there all the time. No, actually, no. Why not? Because when the siren goes off, we listen. One of the things I learned when I moved to this area was when you hear the tornado siren go off, you don't go, wonder what that is. Wonder what that means. It's move now, right? Anybody else, you learn that living around here? When that siren goes off, you get to safety and you get there now. Well, siren's going off and they're all going, wonder what that means. And they're in trouble. So Daniel tries to tell them what's going on. He says in verse 25, this is the message that was written on the wall. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. Now, I believe that the words of that handwritten on the wall was the prophetic warning to that man and to that generation, but I also think it is God's playbook for us in our generation, our time. So I want to take a careful look at each of these statements. The first warning was mene, which is Hebrew for numbered. And Belshazzar says, Daniel, God has numbered your days and your reign and has brought it to an end. You don't seem to understand it, Belshazzar. Let's call him Belly Bob. You don't seem to understand this, Belly Bob, because you bought into the deception of our culture that there aren't any consequences for your choices. Go for it. It doesn't matter. It's not going to happen to you. But let me give it to you straight. Your days are numbered. You only have a set amount of time on this earth. In case anybody's never told you that, listen carefully. Just like the milk, your life has an expiration date. And if there's anything I've learned over the last year, you don't know what that date is. Anything you think, your life has an expiration date. But let me tell you why I think that's so important. God, help me say this in a way they'll get it. Anything you've got a lot of, you tend to squander. I mean, really. But anything you think you got a very limited amount of, you tend to be much more careful and use wisely, right? When you got, you got a lot of money, you don't worry about turning off lights and checking the thermostat, do you? But when you're struggling to pay the electric bill, it's turn the lights off in there, right? How many of you ever heard that phrase growing up? How many of you have been saying it here lately? Check the thermostat. Who turned that thing down? We're going to get a lockbox on that thing. Anything you have a lot of, you squander. But anything you think you've got a limited amount of, you tend to use more wisely. So here's the prophetic warning I believe God was giving Daniel, and I'm asking him to give us. Number your days because your days are numbered. Don't buy into the deception that you got all the time in the world, because you don't. We don't. Instead, number your days because your days are numbered. If you're interested at all in applying that wisdom, let me give you a little assignment, a little exercise you could do today. I want you to imagine that you just found out that you only have 30 more days to live. You got 30 days. And there's no change in it. You got 30 days. I want you today to take a piece of paper, draw a line right down through the middle of it. And on one side, I want you to write the word start and list all the things you're going to start doing, because you only got 30 days. On the other side, you want to guess what I want you right there? Stop. And list some of the things. You got to stop. I only got 30 days. There's no sense in messing with that. Start, stop. Then look at that page and get a clue. Follow the wisdom. That's just a way to apply this if you're interested at all. Now, keep reading. Notice what Daniel said to Belshazzar next. The second word up there, Belshazzar, tekel. Tekel means weighed. You've been weighed on the balances and have not measured up. So God's second prophetic warning to him was tekel, which means weighed in Hebrew. And Daniel's saying to him, okay, Belshazzar, Belly Bob, God's telling you that the way you're spending your life, the way you are spending your time, the way you're spending your money, the way you're spending your energy, the way you're spending your life, it's been weighed on the balances of God, and it has not measured up. Your choices have been weighed on the scale of heaven, and they don't measure up. So I think Daniel's prophetic warning for that day, and I believe God's wisdom for us this day, is simply this. Balance your life, because your life is in the balance. If you had to give an account right now, I mean like right now, if you had to give an account to God right now for how you spend your time, for how you spend your money, for how you're spending your life and your family, for how you're spending your energy and so forth, would you be able to say, I'm nailing it? Yeah, I'm nailing it. Or would you go, Now, I know that's a heavy thought, so I decided at this point I needed to lighten things up. So I did a little research, and I think you're going to enjoy this. The average American, here's this funny. How do we spend our time? Well, the average American eats out 14,411 times in their life. And 1,811 of them are trips to McDonald's. And that'll kill you right there, right? You're kidding me. Okay, here's another one. You're going to spend 13 years and 4 months just watching television. 13 years. Oh, I don't do that. Yeah, but what about your social media? Guess what? It is now up to you. We'll be spending 7 years on social media. That's 6 years, and that's changed this year. It's now 7 years on average. 7 years of your life on social media. You're going to wait in line for 5 years. Be stuck in traffic for 3 months. Yeah, I've been there. I love this one. You will be looking for misplaced items for a solid year of your life. And some of us are going, no, that's more like 2. That's 2 right there. And then, believe it or not, you're going to end up driving 627,000 miles, which is the equivalent of 25 times around the globe. Okay. Now, that's just how we spend our days. That's just how we spend our time. And maybe a humorous sort of way. But the question is, should that be the way we spend our time? And again, that's just our time. We could talk about our money. We could talk about our abilities. We could talk about our influence. But if you're like the average individual in our culture, you're just trying to see how much you can cram into a day. Seeing how much you can cram into the weekend, right? See how much we can cram into this trip and this experience. But here's something, and I think it's on my shelf in this office here. I have a candle somebody once got to me, a little small candle, that they managed to get soft enough that it bent it around to where both ends are straight up, wicks on both ends. And then they put a little statement on it. If you're burning your candle at both ends, you are not as bright as you think you are. Some of you are going to have to think about that one, but it was good. We all need to balance our lives because our lives are in the balance. So are you willing to ask yourself? Here's another one of those exercises. If you're interested at all in applying God's word today, here's the exercise. In light of the fact that my days are numbered and my life matters for something more than pleasure and fun, and my next post on social media, since I only have a limited number of days, how can I balance my life lest my life be out of balance? Think about that and then talk about it. And then that final prophetic word here given in the handwriting on the wall, it says, Parson means divided. Your kingdom's been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So God's final prophetic warning to Belly Bob was parson, which is Hebrew for divided. And Daniel was saying, listen, Belshazzar, what God's trying to tell you here is that your life is about to come apart. The kingdom's going to be carved up by your enemies. And here's how I think that prophetic warning applies to us today in our culture. If we don't realize that our days are numbered, if we don't get our lives in balance, we're going to see our lives divided. Okay? They're going to be divided, they're going to be destroyed. And some of us, we're making choices that are destroying future options in our life. Making choices right now, they're just destroying future options that you'll have. We're destroying our marriage. We're tearing apart our health. We're making choices that are going to just destroy our sense of peace. In Belshazzar's case, the kingdom was divided. It was destroyed. He lost everything. If you don't believe that, go fact check this. It was 539 BC, the very time frame it's talking about this event, when another nation, the Medes and the Persians, they're coming in. They invade that night, take over, and guess what happens to Belshazzar? He gets the little X's over his eyes because he dies. A new kingdom comes in, and that's the end of it. So Daniel's prophetic warning here, I think, is that in God's playbook for us today is this. Notice the warning signs, because the warning signs are your notice. You're being put on notice by God. If you got some warning signs going off in your life, you're being put on notice by God. So pay attention, would you? The warning signs are there. Probably very little of what I've said to you today is new, right? That's just not really brilliant, and I never thought of that before. Yes, you have. The warning signs are there, but culture's trying to trick us to ignore them, to ignore the consequences of our choices. But the reality is that there are always consequences to our choices. We are free to make our choices, but we are not free to choose the consequences of our choices. First, we will make our choices, and then our choices will make us. And so God comes along and says, listen, I'm giving you some warning signs. I'm giving you some warning signs before this happens in your life. Don't ignore them. Don't ignore them. And let me apply this to us for just real quick. I'm trying to apply this for us today. Let me give you what I see are the more common warning signs that go off in our lives, and we don't seem to notice them. When we're out of balance like all this, you know what? One of the warning signs that's going off in your life is that the risk of sinful choices increases. When you're tired and you're out of balance, is it not true that you find yourself being tempted more and falling to those temptations more? Hello? That's a sign things are out of balance. Your emotions are inconsistent. Oh, dear God, please get somebody in there listening to this one. If you find yourself flying off the handle more often, getting mad, yelling at cars that cannot hear you, that's a warning sign. Things are probably out of balance in your life. You're not numbering your days. You become less productive. If you don't honor the principle of balancing work and rest, you will become less productive. This is called the law of diminished resources. It's going to take you longer to do the same thing. You become less productive. And if you try to shove more and more into your day and into your weekend, not only you become less productive, you're also going to shove God and worship right out of your life. But let me give you another one. And this one is hard to actually say out loud, but it's true. You struggle to hear God's voice. God is speaking. God doesn't have a speaking problem. But we get to have hearing problems because when my life is so full of other things and I'm getting so consumed by them, it's hard to hear God. True? And if I'm struggling to hear from God lately, that's probably a sign my life is out of balance. And it's about to be divided, destroyed. And those are all common warning signs. And if you're interested at all in what to do about those warning signs, let me show you real quickly what the response needs to be by looking at this passage again. And I'm going to tell you the response needs to be not what Belshazzar did. His is the example of what not to do in response. Notice verse 29. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was dressed in purple robes. He told him to do that. Gave him a gold chains hung around his neck, and he was proclaimed third highest ruler in the kingdom. In other words, Belshazzar simply ignored what Daniel said and just went right on with the party. Hey, give me another drink, would you? Just ignored it. But notice what happened. That very night, Belshazzar the king was killed. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. In other words, Belshazzar ignored all the warnings. And it cost him his kingdom and it cost him his life. So what can we learn in times like these? How can we respond to the warning signs being set off in our lives? Let me quickly give you 3 thoughts and then we're going to pray. First of all, I want to encourage you today, please live with purpose. Oh, if you hear nothing, please hear this. Live with purpose. If your days are numbered and your life really does matter, which it does, then live with a sense of purpose. As long as I still have breath, God still has something He wants to do in me, and He wants to do through me. And I want you to know that's one of the few things that keep me getting up in the morning right now. So heed the warning and make the choice to live with a sense of purpose. By the way, one of the great side benefits of living that way is it gives you something to focus on that's bigger than your problems. And it helps. Second thing I'd encourage you is put first things first, would you? Please put first things first. If you're going to get your life in balance, you got to put first things first. Start with the most important and put them in your life first before you start stuffing in all this other stuff. Don't let the first things become the leftovers you try to squeeze in. And every one of us already knows what the most important first thing is, don't we? It's God. It's God. So give Him the first part of your life. Give Him the first part of your day. Give Him the first part of your week. Give Him the first part of your finances. Give Him the first part of your abilities. Give Him the first part. Put first things first. I had already written this and I messed it up last night. Okay. A few years ago, I got one of those fancy faucets that all you do is touch it and the water comes on. Remember that, Jackson? You thought that was the coolest thing in my house. You just touched it and the water came on. Well, now when you touched it and it went off, it didn't go off. It just dripped. So I looked, how do you fix this? I mean, I did what everybody does whenever you got a question. I asked YouTube. And it told me how to fix that. And the first thing it said, and I got out the instructions too, the very first thing it says, what are you supposed to do when you're going to fix this? Turn off the water. Did I turn off the water before I started? No. I reached down and I can do this, and I'm going to, all of a sudden, and it popped off. And all of a sudden, I got water going everywhere. I mean, and oh no. So at least I'm, you know what insanity is? If water's running like that and you don't turn the water off, you try to mop up the mess. At first, I tried to turn the water off. And I reached in and turned that valve off, and nothing happened because it was the wrong valve. And I find the other valve and I turn it off. And by that time, I don't even get that wet when I'm showering. I mean, I'm drenched. And of course, I've got my daughter and mom over here going, "You're all wet." Thank you for that news flash. First things first, turn off the water. Guys, you all know what first thing is. Most important first thing is God. Put Him first. And the final thing I'd say to you is please do it now. Don't wait. God's speaking to you right now about some things. True? I really believe in my heart God is saying something to every single person in this room and everybody online about something He wants you to respond. Do it. Do it now, even as we pray. Lord, I want to thank You for every person who's come in here today. I want to pray over them because I believe You're trying to speak into our lives. And I'm just asking You to let it be right now. Some of you that are in this room and some of you online understand God's been trying to get your attention for a long time, but you've just ignored Him. Well, today's the day. And it might be your very first time to say to God, "You're right, I'm wrong. I choose You. I want to become a follower. I want to become a Christian because I'm tired of these consequences." For others, Lord, I believe that there are those who they got warning signs going off in their lives. I mean, the sirens are sounding off and they've just been ignoring them. Would You grant today the openness and the willingness to listen to the warning signs and respond? Respond now. And then, Father, I would pray together with those in the room who understand and feel this heart. We've got people we love. We've got a family member, we've got a friend, that the sirens are going off like crazy and they're ignoring them. They keep going down that same road, and And that path has a destination that they've tried to ignore, but they're not going to be able to do it. We pray over them. Dear God, get their attention. Dear God, get their attention. Get their attention. Turn them around before it's too late. Now, Lord, I want to thank you for every person who is willing to let your word sink in today and apply. And may your strength give them the ability, give us the ability, give me the ability to follow through by trusting in you. And may today be a day where we truly know that the God who meets us between a rock and a parched place is the same God who can send the rain. So do it this day, I pray. And all of his people said, amen. Hey, would you encourage somebody before you go? Just give them a hug.